Hello world of YouTube. In 2002, I was turning 10, I was reaching a new milestone in life, and my life itself was kind of in flux. Similarly to how in flux I'm sure a lot of the country at large felt, given in the US it was a reactionary period. A lot of the country, especially those on the East Coast, were still sort of reacting to the events of 9/11. It was a very tense time in this country. Not even a year after the fact, music had this reactionary response in some instances. A lot of artists were dropping stuff that was felt in a different mindset. Music in general just felt like it was in this huge huge transitional period all its own. And today, I'm going to be breaking down my 20 favorite albums that dropped during that transitional period. Was all of it stuff that I was listening to as a kid? No, but shockingly enough, some stuff from back then and stuff that I discovered throughout the 2000s at large did still make its way on here. There's a lot of classics from that era, even if 2002 wasn't my favorite year in the 2000s musically. Some really good stuff dropped. And as always, these lists are my opinion, but go ahead and give it a like if you're excited, and let's go ahead and get started. Never trust your first take. So while you're not going to be seeing a whole lot of post me with the webcam, especially to this volume, but everything I had to say about Amon Amarth's Versus the World was just felt like fluff trash. I like Versus the World. I think it is one of these standout pieces in what I would argue is a pretty mediocre discography, because Amon Amarth have their shtick and they really just work on different ways to make that shtick work. But I feel like Versus the World was like a benchmark pivot point in the band's discography for making a really good version of what they do. I like the riff work on here a lot. I think that it paired with the melodic riffs above the chugga riffs with that production style that this record has feels like a standard for the band. You know, I feel like the gravitas is well harnessed. You know, the points where they make you feel like you're marching into a Viking battle are great. You know, the blast beat stuff is still really good on here thanks to the production style as well. While it would not be my go-to nostalgic metal album from the 2000s that I liked, I do enjoy the time I do spend with this record even now, more so than, again, any other time I visit their newer stuff in their discography. When I mean the world like immediately reacted to 9/11, I mean like it was instantaneous. Case in point, like this Coldplay album opens with a song written that day that I'm assuming had to be like changed, or it was like immediately reactionary. And even throughout the next couple of months, they were like, no, that's gotta be it. That's gotta be what opens our album that has one of like the best runs, A-sides in like pop rock in the 2000s. Like it is quintessential Scrubs rock. In My Place, Clocks. Get the fuck out of The Scientist. Get the fuck out of here. But A Rush of Blood to the Head is an album of evolution for a band in Coldplay's lane. You know, they dance with some interesting ideas here and there, like on the backdrop of Warning Sign. They inject some fun string play on Daylight. Like, it's a band that knows a lane, knows what they want to push towards, and just executes it in a really amicable way. While I don't talk about Coldplay with much glowing adoration I do like some of their catalog. And A Rush of Blood to the Head is a perfect example of a Coldplay album that I think is pretty damn good in my opinion. Opeth were really on something special in the early 2000s because they already dropped Blackwater Park a year prior to Deliverance, but crafted that masterpiece and just said, you know what? We aren't done yet. They keep it long. They keep it proggy. They keep it flashy. It's an album that knows when to get raw and gritty before pulling the listener out of the madness and casting them off into something truly beautiful. You know, and while I don't necessarily like Deliverance nearly as much as Blackwater Park, I do think that as far as doing some back-to-back heavy metal prog work, you could have done far worse with an album like Deliverance, but I do think that it is a pretty fucking great album in the band's discography. While political commentary in this lane is abound in a lot of music of this era, I love how Sleater Kenny chose to approach tackling the xenophobic and just generally narrow-minded side of the politics and the mindset of people, those reacting to the events of 9/11. And I think that it's cool that amidst this heavy, very dense, politically written stuff, they also find ways to evolve their sound and evolve their collaborative process to make an album that feels like a good evolution of the band trying to create a message that is important to tell their way. You know, tracks like Far Away and Light Rail Coyote are just fiercely colossal, while tracks like the opener One Beat and Combat Rock really evolve on this sort of songwriting idea that they just perfect on here. I love this album, and while it is really low on this list in the grand scheme of 20, I still think that it is an essential piece of not only the band's discography, because it is a strong outing by these three, but also acts as a strong example of well-made written albums in the post-9/11 wake that handle the subject matter, or at least the general mindset of the time, in a real fucking way. I think that it's fucking awesome. ISIS have this magical ability on Oceanic of crafting the best representation of, like, if water made heavy metal music I've ever heard. While I've never talked about the band on the channel before, I do like their classics, and I would put Oceanic up there as certainly one of those. I feel like while the album by and large dances in this, again, very aquatic feeling ambience with the type of reverb that they use and the guitar tones they play with throughout these longer driven songs, when they decide to get heavy and, you know, have this lyric sheet that is of the story of this man who finds out the woman that was the love of his life was cheating on him with her brother at the time throughout their entire relationship, and it drives him to this dark mental state. The heaviness that that story and imagery evoke matches that same aquatic style oh so masterfully. You know, they feel less like a cinder block through a glass window and more like waves crashing against a wall or against you as you sway a desolate body amidst the ocean blue. But I think that they let the pain that a protagonist going through that would feel hit the listener also strong, all the stronger.
Man, I make a buck, why scram? I'm trying to show y'all who the fuck I am. The Jews is
Pusha T and his brother No Malice under the moniker Clips debuted this year with Lord Willin'. You had Pharrell dropping some classic beats with these guys on here, man. You got these guys' chemistry at such a tight-knit genesis. You can feel the brotherly love. Obviously, Grindin' is a classic, but I've also got a soft spot for tracks like Ego and Virginia, especially given later on in life I was living in Virginia and getting more into the Virginia scene in hip-hop. I also fucking love Cot Damn. It's got really good collabs outside of that. It is not my favorite Clips album, but a really strong debut, and I would argue one of the better debuts in the 2000s, especially when it came to, like, helping a scene get some real big showcasing in a huge way.
You're giving me too many.
People who aren't familiar with my of the year lists for music, regardless of when it is, may think it's weird that I put soundtracks on here, but the Kingdom Hearts soundtrack came out in 2002, and outside of Simple and Clean, which is a bona fide classic, the actual songs on here, whether evoking battles and showing some gravitas amid that, to some of just the area themes, like Traverse Town, Hollow Bastion, there are interpolations of Disney classics into the sound style of this game. Iconic. I really love the soundtrack of Kingdom Hearts, and I think that its use of orchestra is really cool, and I feel like they do a really good job at using the orchestral palette to give much more personality to these worlds than you could see in other aspects of RPGs at the time, in my opinion, while also having some really good themes in there on top of that to set it above other games in its genre and in its lane from a musical perspective. And while I have a bevy of things to say about the Kingdom Hearts franchise as a whole, the music, especially on this soundtrack, is iconic.
Ship is sinking. The ship is sinking.
Tom Waits had a really good 2002, and while I also really like Alice, and it almost ended up on this list as well, I just like the songs on Blood Money more. You know, I fucking love Coney Island Baby. It's giving real closing time energy, and I'm here for it. Another Man's Vine has just this nice little swagger to it that I really enjoy. I love the theatricality that that song kind of invokes. I really love the sadness explored on the Part You Throw Away. There's just a lot of emotion on here that I think resonates incredibly well, that I wouldn't say is absent from Alice. Again, I just think it's channeled better on Blood Money. I love the sonic tapestry of this a lot and the utilization of such. And again, if we're talking about tapping into just the darkness that some of the 2000s had going on, especially earlier on in the decade, I mean, Misery is the River of the World just feels like just such a raw portrayal of that, you know what I mean? While not in my top 3 Meshuggah albums, I would still say Nothing is a classic for all the reasons it's been hailed up to in the past. It feels like Meshuggah evolving from their thrashier roots into what you could be argued is like proto-gent stuff. I mean, Rational Gaze has kind of been memed to death to some degrees, but I mean, the riffage on that track, on Organic Shadows, and on Nebulous, the guitar slaps on that feel like just an uppercut to the chin every fucking time. And I like that they don't necessarily lose where the intensity of Chaos Sphere was. You know, they still got pockets of it on here. But again, Meshuggah have always been about evolution, and I feel like while they've done more graceful evolutions, Nothing is an important one that does stick the landing more often than not.
Tapping my foot to the beat on the radio, dreaming about the mic and the money and the ladies. Oh, mom.
I've rapped over one of the instrumentals on this album.
Writing a masterpieces, I'm beating your own diseases. Pocket full of bars and looking to feed the meter.
As far as like angry white dude rap goes, I would argue Early Atmosphere is like the best example of that. God Loves Ugly transcends a lot of that stuff by a good margin. I feel like the consistency throughout the instrumental palette, I feel like the allegorical writing on here is fucking sharp. I really love Vampires. I think it's a top 5 Atmosphere cut. I think that just when it came to pulling together some of the looseness that could have been seen from some of the EP work around this into a concise, consistent, relatively conceptual record if you're talking about an artist mindset, and great writing, can't go much better than God Loves Ugly, man. It's a really strong hip-hop album in a year stacked with some fucking classics in my eye.
She cries but loves to sing songs of freedom and hope on the east side, hustling, discussing things that we quote in shallow
And while I really appreciate Slug and Ant and what they pulled together on God Loves Ugly, I've just been a Sage Francis fan for longer. I got into Sage Francis around the Healthy Distrust era, and I really like Personal Journals. I'd gone back and listened to that, and I think that it is a well-written self-portrait. It really gets to the nitty-gritty of Sage's problems and his own personal excursions mentally, the facets of its life that he really appreciates, while also having this like lovely melding of nice poetics, well-crafted bars, and this sort of live studio marriage that I feel like sets this album in its own realm presentation-wise. I think that it's a really cool, unique style hip-hop album that has been a personal favorite of mine for a long time, but I think stands the test of time as far as presenting a perspective in hip-hop that is intrinsically itself. There's a real darkness on here in the storytelling that I just think sets it even above, again, the subject that I just talked about. I didn't mean to line this up so closely, because I would personally put Personal Journals like a decent bit above God Loves Ugly in the echelon. I really like God Loves Ugly, but Personal Journals, and maybe it's just because of a personal thing. I mean, it's the raw, gritty debut of one of my favorite bands of all time. I've talked about Remission in my Mastodon discography review, but I really love how gritty this fucking thing sounds. While I appreciate the grandiosity that they've explored since, I think that their genesis is just so well pulled together. The riff work on here is fucking mind-melting. The moments when the drums just pummel you on top of that, pure bliss. The razor-sharp vocals, the sheer ferocity by and large on this. While it is so very raw, it still feels like it's gonna burn your speakers to the ground if cranked at full volume. I love Remission for what it does to create this nice twang on a sludge that helped flourish out a scene, honestly, in my opinion, but I think is just, again, a great foundation with which one of my favorite bands would sprout from. While not losing a sense of melody and core moments to keep the listener invested in what flashy components the band has to bring to the table. It's just a nice dance that Mastodon does on Remission that keeps me coming back every time. Yoshimi Battles the Pink Robots may be one of the Flaming Lips' strongest albums to date, but it is also the evolution on an era of their career that did have some beauty within its psychedelic flourishments that I think helped pivot it into the new millennium. I love the production style of this, and I love how it sees them conceptualizing even bigger on here. I think the psychedelic backdrop helps enhance these futuristic ideas so well, and it, again, feels very in line with the times as far as asking bigger questions in a time of change. And obviously, that's a pretty shared opinion. This is held as one of the most adored records of its time, and it's for good reason. It's just a classic in its lane. You know, I love the atmospheres on this. I love the guitars. I love how they sound. I love the backdrop at which the band is painting on here. You know, there's this lushness here that just sounds so beautiful that I think juxtaposing some of the ideas lyrically also just services so very strongly. I think the beauty in a lot of good industrial adjacent acts is how well it really can fuse these dense, sharp sound collages with a real sense of harmony and beauty. And Dalek are masters of the craft. And while I've praised Dalek on the channel in the past in their late career for reaching that good stride, in their early career, they were just on some other shit. Their sophomore outing released in 2002, it sees them using this lo-fi production style to their credit to let their dark lyricism shine in all of this harsh, abrasive atmospheres beautifully. It's got a lot of the themes that Dalek have explored in other parts of their catalog that I've discussed in a little more of an intimate feeling package. You know, they talk about hypocrisy in religion. They talk about feeling like an outcast based on their beliefs. It's got some incredible instrumental work to suit that. And I think the beats on here are just fucking tight. And this was them using, you know, those soft ideas to enrich their thematics tenfold in the best way possible. As far as, like, album experiences in this lane, I think that From Filthy Tongues of Gods and Griots is one of the shining examples in its genre of some of the best work that this group has ever written.
Just to hold your hand when you die, and to give you a assault rifle up and a clip. Glow in the dark when it's still in the park. Giving everybody informative pamphlet.
Now, the group Imaginary Places had on my mind between 15 or so years ago to now alone would put it on this list. But I mean, Bus Driver, at his peak as far as, like, writing, again, that flow and verbosity is just dense and well harnessed. He's writing some really good stuff that taps into the ideas of escapism amidst this shitty-ass world. And defending himself as one of the best voices in the game, justifiably so, is also showcased a bit on here. He does his own poetic delving into social consciousness, but I like that he finds this balance between seriousness and non-seriousness. It's also got really good justification for its interlude tracks as well. I think that it's just, as an album experience, again, in the genre, it's hard to get better than this. Now, I streamed this game in full last year. You guys probably know by this point, I like Jet Set Radio as a franchise. I like the soundtracks as well. I talked about this also on my video game compilations list a handful of years ago. I think that collectively the remixes on the Jet Set Radio tracks into the soundscape of Jet Set Radio is well done. I think that the new tracks are also incredible, and the guest tracks are also better than the guest tracks by and large in some parts of the original soundtrack. I think that while I still appreciate the soundscape and interpolation of hip-hop into the soundtrack of the original more, I think that the more electronic-leaning inspiration that parts of the soundtrack takes from is still utilized incredibly well. Now, a lot of this top 4 is all going to feel kind of obvious because of the type of music fan that I am. Because, I mean, you're telling me a guy that likes the post-punk revival of the early 2000s really enjoys Turn on the Bright Lights by Interpol? Wow. How surprising. It's not like the emotional core of this album just kind of helped resonate with me in my early 20s. It's not like I really enjoy the song crafting on here by and large. Like, yeah, parts of this album get really fucking out there, but that kind of is indebted to the genre as a whole. I enjoy Turn on the Bright Lights for what it brings to the table, and I think that it captures not quite adolescent, but youthful energy so eloquently well. And I think if you're capturing a snapshot into the evolution of rock, not only just in the early 2000s, but again, post 9/11, Interpol's Turn on the Bright Lights is an archetype for the great things that came from that scene of that era.
She said, I'll throw myself away.
Now, I actually talked about this album on an older favorite albums of all time video that I also probably will remake at some point in the future, but I still got a soft spot for Songs of the Deaf. Yeah, it's a little lower on my personal favorites of all time list than it used to be, but I still appreciate the fuck out of this desert rock classic. You know, I think that Dave's drumming is still incredible on here. I think the concept that has still been explored to this day in music is done so very well on Songs for the Deaf. I think that its own sort of thematics within the world amidst that radio play concept presentation is still done really, really well. And I think that if you're talking about a rock band at its peak just writing some of its best songs, Songs for the Deaf is a great embodiment of that.
Waving your gun, somebody new.
Again, I'm a pretty big Beck fan. I've talked about Sea Change here and there. I love Sad Boy Beck. And I think that Beck coming back together with Nigel Godric's Post-Mutations to further evolve the sort of pseudo-sad boy tunes on that into some genuinely beautiful, heartbreaking stuff on Sea Change is so well done. I also talked about tracks from this in my favorite Beck songs of all time. I mean, it's easily, again, one of the best in Beck's catalog, and obviously, if that's the case, one of the best of 2002. While not quite tapping into the general mourning and sadness that parts of the world were feeling, I felt like tangentially, in a personal way, Beck still hit the zeitgeist in a way that just fucking worked.
Spilling the leftovers of creational clay. Regrew with the concept, now we're ready to go pub.
And again, I've talked about Fandam and how much I love this album. LP even knows how much I love this album. He's seen me tweet it before. This album changed hip-hop for me. LP is one of the best rappers of all time. LP is one of the best producers of all time. I'll do a ranking the songs someday. That was almost the subject of today's video until I really looked at 2002's musical landscape and went, honestly, similarly to 1992, there was a lot of really good opportunities to talk about bands and artists I haven't talked about in the past. But Fandam is still not just the best album of 2002, not just one of the best hip-hop albums of all time, but one of the best albums of all time, period. And that's my list for 2002. Again, similarly to 1992, it's kind of anticlimactic because I've talked about my favorite from that year so intensely. But thank you for watching. Hopefully you still enjoyed everything leading up to this. Sometimes it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. Thank you for watching. If you like to give it a like, let me know some of your favorite albums from 2002 in the comments down below. If you liked it, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I'm going through at the time. But I'm gonna go. I've been Viral Rack. You guys are good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.